Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Safiyyah, your host. In Islamic law, there's a principle that if something is forbidden, you should also avoid the means that lead to it. This is meant to prevent harm, but it often leads to restrictions against women. We're going to be looking at that now, especially in reference to this series by this person, al-Halim Abu Shuqqah. He's a scholar. He's written a series called Women's Emancipation During the Prophet's Lifetime, and we're looking at that in reference to this principle. And I'm going to welcome Dr. Shabir. Dr. Shabir, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be on.
So let's talk about this idea in Islamic law that you should avoid the means that leads to something wrong, Dr. Shabir. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what that principle is.
Yeah. So, Safiyyah, people take this principle in a simplistic manner, and Abu Shuqqah has devoted the entire 6th volume within the 8-volume series, yes. Dealing exactly with this principle and showing the various facets of it that would not be so obvious to the ordinary person. Now, for the ordinary Muslim, it seems to make sense. Yes, we're supposed to prevent evil. And we can say the flip side of that, Safiyyah, is that if something is obligatory, we have to do it, then you have to acquire the means to do it. Like, let's say, you have to look after your children, right? Your sustenance of your children depend on you. So you have to do whatever it takes within Islamic law to acquire the means of sustenance so that you can sustain your children. So if it means going out, getting a job, and so on. So you can say it's obligatory for this person to get a job. And we can speak to their brother and say, what's wrong with you, man? You're not getting a job and your children are starving, right? So it's his obligation to look after his children. And if that means getting a job, well, then he has to get a job, right? The flip side of that is if it's haram or forbidden to do something, then we have to stave off the avenues that would lead to that path.
So maybe we should think about how this would play out in practice. Like if people will say, for example, like a woman shouldn't go to school because this could lead to harm. Or not a girl, I guess, shouldn't go to school or shouldn't pursue an education because this would lead to societal harm somehow if she's going out in society and mingling with other people, right?
So what al-Halim Abu Shuqqah is showing is that while that is one aspect of Islamic law to prevent harm, there are other aspects of as well that all have to be brought into focus. And by just fixating on that one thing, just preventing the harm, and enacting strict measures to prevent that particular harm of women and men interacting with each other and so on, people, finding themselves in adulterous situations and all of that. So in order to prevent all of that, the strict measures, if they are too strict, he's not calling for the total abandonment of all measures, but he's saying let's have a balanced approach to this, because if you are not finely balanced with this, then what he has seen and he's showing is that this leads to undue inconvenience for both men and women. It leads to hardship in society, and it even leads to moral corruption, which people generally don't speak about. But corruption happens one way or another, because you cannot prevent all harm like this. You cannot prevent all evils. People are of different types. Some people are attracted towards good. Some people are attracted towards evil. And if you block off the means for them to find the evils that they seek, they will find it in some other way. So that doesn't mean you open all avenues for them to go and do evil, but it means striking a balance in between so that you eliminate as much evil as you can in a reasonable manner, and at the same time you allow for growth of society, for progress, for healthy interaction between men and women and all elements of society, and for the overall happiness of people within the society, and also for the carrying out of other requirements and obligations within Islamic law. So you mentioned education. Well, education is an obligation in Islamic law as well. So we have to get educated, and this is for both men and women. So if somebody says, oh, let's stave off harm by limiting women's education, well, why not stave off harm by limiting the education of both? Why not say, girls go to school on Mondays and boys go to school on Tuesdays.
Yeah,
So
and I
that
was thinking, throughout this conversation, I was thinking, Dr. Shabir, that this concept of like sad al-dhara'i, right, I believe it is
Mhm.
called in Arabic, it mostly only applies to women. Like I only see in common parlance, I mostly see it referring to women's freedom, or restrictions on women. They'll say women can't do this, because there's a risk here, of further harm. I don't see it ever referred to men.
Yeah, you're right. So you said it correctly, saddu dhari'a in the Arabic, which means the blocking of the means. And sometimes it's mentioned in the plural, saddu dhara'i, blocking of the means. Why it seems that it's always applied to women in contradistinction to men. Perhaps so one reason is that the men who are often the legislators are saying, well, it's necessary for men to be outdoors and pursue a living and so on, whereas women are more suited for the home life, taking care of the children, looking after the household, and so on. So let's have this neat division where men are outdoors, women are indoors, and all women need to do is to know how to take care of their babies, and we don't need to educate them. And in fact, this has led to the call in some quarters, and this was very popular at one time. Nowadays, we only hear little squeaks of it, like, for example, coming from one particular country where they're saying, no, don't educate the women. Because they're saying, if you educate the women, then first of all, this is unnecessary. And second, it will lead to more harm in society. The women will become, champions of their own rights. They will become more aware of the world. They will lord it over their husbands, and they will demand, positions in society. And of course, they by becoming open to the world, they become open to all of the evils of the world. We may as well protect them and keep their minds pure and simple.
You know the arguments well, Dr. Shabir.
Well, because
you've heard it so many times.
Yes, and Abu Shuqqah actually recounts some of these arguments with reference to books and articles that have been written in which people who otherwise we might have thought them to be like good, sane, and even good scholars of the Islamic faith, but they thought as people thought several hundred years ago, and so they said things like this.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we counter that? By showing that actually, as Abu Shuqqah is showing, one aspect of this, for the segment that we want to achieve today, is to show some examples from the Quran and the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that show that a balance has already been struck, so that while we will eliminate evils as much as we can in a reasonable manner, though you can't eliminate all evil, at the same time there is freedom of movement and opportunity for women to learn and for them to be active members within Muslim societies.
Mm-hmm. So let's go through some of the examples, Dr. Shabir. He lists a whole bunch of them. Which ones do you find most interesting?
Well, let's look at 5 such examples.
Okay.
For the limited time that we have now. One is that the Quran in Surah 24, verse number 31, starting with verse number 30, actually, it tells men and women to lower their gazes and to guard their private parts, which prima facie, it indicates that men and women will interact with each other. And because otherwise there's no reason to lower your gaze. What are you going to lower your gaze from if there's nobody to be seen, right? So, moreover, as a second example, we can mention along the same lines that women and men are both instructed to dress in a decent manner to cover their private parts. So guarding your private parts and also lowering your gaze, 2 prescriptions right there. Women are told not to stamp their feet when they walk so that their anklets might jingle. Right, just that's drawing unwanted attention to themselves. Well, here is a third prescription, which incidentally means that women could walk in a decent manner in public, right? Otherwise, the instruction makes no sense. Add to this, the women were never prevented from going to the mosque, either by God in the Quran or the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in anything reported from him. In fact, quite the contrary. The Quran presumes that women are in the mosque, and the Hadiths actually specifically say that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, do not forbid the female servants of God from coming to the mosques, right? So, and that was known to be a lasting prescription. Nobody said that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, canceled that. Later on, people tried to make amends to this and tried to say, oh, but he meant that only for that time. And had he seen the women of our time, he would have prevented them and so on. But the instruction of the Prophet, peace be upon him, remained, and it's there in the books. And lastly, we can mention that the slave women, and now it's a bit out of place today to speak about slave women, but we want to understand the historical situation. And here is the point. The slave women were not expected to cover their hair. So what about when they came to the prayer? Imam Malik, the eponym at the head of one of the four most recognized schools of Islamic jurisprudence, is known to have explicitly said, as cited by al-Halim, that the slave women are not required to cover their hair when they come to the prayer. So that, and one of the great Hanafi jurists of another school, the Hanafi school, said that the rationale behind this is that the slave women are always out and about running errands, and it will be inconvenient for them to go grab their headscarf every time they have to come to the prayer. So they're allowed to come to the prayer without the headscarf. What does it mean? It means that if a man went to the mosque and he saw the women there, he would invariably see some women without the head cover. And if seeing a woman without a head cover in the mosque would be like, la hawla wa la quwwata, it is like a disaster, what's going on here, then somebody should have protested at that time. But obviously, they considered it to be normal. If I add to what Abu Shuqqah was saying, I would say that, there is a distinction between indecency and proper decorum, right? Proper decorum means, like, in an Islamic society, let's say, especially in a bygone society, it would be like incorrect for a man to appear without his head covered. They thought that the head covering, even for a man, was part of proper decorum. But he wouldn't be indecent. Or again, indecent would mean that he's removing much more than his head cover. So for a woman as well, like, the head cover is part of public decorum. It's etiquette. But indecency would be like removing much more than that. So for a slave woman to appear in the Muslim society without a head cover, okay, she lacked the decorum of a free woman. And she's excused on that, by virtue of her status in society. But she was not indecent. And so she could come to the prayer and be like that. She's not appearing in an indecent way.
So basically, all these examples are showing that there's not an emphasis on removing the harm to the extent that we think of it today.
Exactly.
Right? Like, there's an allowance that, okay, things are not going to be perfect, but that's okay.
Yes,
right?
Yes. I mean, a man might have seen a slave woman and in the mosque, and maybe he feels attracted to her. Maybe he starts having indecent thoughts, but he doesn't have to see a woman for that to happen. He can just remember some of his dreams. He can just use his imagination. If people are wicked, they're going to think about wicked things. And even a good person, may have a flash of thought that is unspeakable for a good person, and he might want to refocus his mind. But even that, refocusing the mind after that flash of evil thought, that too is a virtue. And so even though there are challenges and things which are unbecoming momentarily, the believer overcomes that, and the overcoming of that itself is what leads us closer and closer to God. So we get close to God not by totally eradicating all evils, but eradicating as much as we reasonably can, and overcoming the rest and returning to God after having sinned, even in little ways.
Nicely put, Dr. Shabir. So next time we're going to be looking at more examples of this balance between the balance that the Sharia lays out, Dr. Shabir.
Yes, and to conclude, Safiyyah, the main point Abu Shuqqah is making about this is that the Sharia already laid down the balance. You know, the Quran and the life example of the Prophet, peace be upon him, already showed us a balanced way of,
So he's calling us to go back to that balance.
Exactly. Limiting the harm, but at the same time promoting the good. Not totally, going to such an extreme in eradicating the evil so that along with the evil, you eradicate a lot of good from society as well.
All right. Thank you for that, Dr.
You're welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Muslim Media Hub, the new home of Let the Quran Speak.
Here we spread positivity and good. We help people experience the beauty of Islam and help them appreciate and understand Muslims.
This beautiful building we purchased at cost $2.3 million.
Yeah, we've already raised a third of that money, and with your help, inshallah, we can pay off the rest.
So we're looking for people who can give $1,000 each. If you can be part of the select group, that's amazing.
Otherwise, just please give whatever you can. Every dollar counts.
It's our collective responsibility to share the message of Islam with our fellow human beings. Please help us continue this good work.
It's a sadaqah jariyah, something that will continue to be a benefit to the Muslim community long after Safiyyah and I are gone.
Please support our work at muslimmediahub.com.
Your support is zakat eligible and tax deductible.
May Allah bless you and your loved ones today and always. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.